December 1946, New York Harbor. The SS Marine Flasher cut through the grey Atlantic waters, carrying 73 German women toward an uncertain future. Among them stood Greta Müller, 24, clutching a worn photograph of a man she'd never met. Her fiancé, her escape, her new owner, she thought bitterly. "Do you think they'll be kind?" whispered Liesel, the blonde girl beside her, barely 19. Greta touched the fading bruise on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. "Does it matter? We signed the papers." The Statue of Liberty emerged through the fog, and several women began to cry. Greta remained silent, her jaw tight. She'd survived the bombings of Berlin, the Russian occupation, and 8 months in a displaced persons camp. She would survive this too. At the pier, American soldiers checked documents while a crowd of men waited behind a rope barrier. Greta scanned their faces, searching for the one from her photograph. Instead, she found dozens of hungry stares. Greta Müller. A tall man in a worn suit approached, hat in hand. Thomas Brennan. His photograph hadn't captured the sadness in his eyes. Yes, her English was careful, practiced. "Welcome to America." He didn't smile. "My truck is outside." As they walked through the crowd, a man grabbed Liesel's arm. "You're mine now, Fräulein. Better get used to it." Greta's stomach turned. Thomas noticed her expression. "Not all of us are like that," he said quietly. "But some are." It wasn't a question. The drive to his farm in Pennsylvania took 6 hours. Thomas barely spoke, and Greta was grateful. She studied the landscape, so different from her destroyed homeland. Clean, untouched, almost offensive in its perfection. The farmhouse was modest, but intact. Thomas carried her single suitcase inside, setting it down in a small bedroom. "This is yours," he said. "The door locks from the inside." Greta blinked. "I don't understand." Thomas turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something unexpected in his expression. Guilt. "My brother wrote those letters," he said. "He died in France, 1944. I found your correspondence after the funeral. You'd already agreed to come, and He paused. "I couldn't let you stay in that camp, but I need you to know something." Greta's heart pounded. Another lie, another trap. "You don't have to marry me," Thomas continued. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You can stay here, work if you'd like, leave when you're ready. You have a choice." The words hung in the air, like something impossible. "Why?" Greta whispered. Thomas looked away. "Because someone should have given my sister the same choice." Before Greta could respond, headlights swept across the window. A truck pulled into the driveway and 3 men climbed out. Thomas's face went pale. "That's the sheriff, and he's not here for a social call." Greta stepped back from the window, her pulse racing. "What do they want?" "Immigration checks," Thomas said, his voice tight. "They've been cracking down on the war bride program, looking for fraud, they claim. But I have papers. Papers don't matter if they decide you're not really married." He met her eyes. "If they find out we're not, they'll send you back." The knock on the door was sharp, authoritative. Greta's hands trembled. Back to Germany meant back to nothing. No home, no family, just rubble and starvation, and men who looked at women like they were spoils of war. Thomas moved toward the door, then stopped. "I need to ask you something, and you can say no. But if you say yes, you have to sell it." "Sell what?" "That we're married, that we're—" He struggled with the words. "That we're in love." Another knock, harder this time. "Thomas Brennan, open up!" Greta thought of Liesel's frightened face at the pier, of the man who'd grabbed her arm, of the camp she'd left behind. This was a different kind of trap, but at least Thomas was offering her a key. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Thomas exhaled. "Follow my lead, and forgive me in advance." He opened the door. Sheriff Morrison stood there, flanked by 2 deputies, his expression cold and suspicious. "Evening, Tom. Heard you got yourself a German bride." His eyes found Greta. "That her?" "This is my wife, Greta." Thomas's voice was steady, but Greta noticed his hand shaking slightly. "Wife." Morrison stepped inside without invitation. Funny thing, county clerk says you filed the marriage certificate 3 days ago, but the ship manifest shows she arrived yesterday. The room went silent. We were married by proxy, Thomas said. Legal in Pennsylvania. Illegal, maybe. Convenient, definitely. Morrison circled Greta like a predator. You speak English, Fraulein? Yes. Greta lifted her chin. And it's Mrs. Brennan. We'll see about that. Morrison pulled out a notepad. Where'd you two meet? Greta's mind raced. She knew nothing about Thomas except what his dead brother had written. Letters full of lies about a farm, a future, a man who didn't exist. Through letters, Thomas said. My brother introduced us before he died. Your brother? Morrison's tone was skeptical. The war hero. Convenient he's not here to confirm that story. There's nothing convenient about my brother being dead, Sheriff. The tension crackled. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably. Morrison turned back to Greta. Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, what's your husband's favorite meal? Greta's throat went dry. She had no idea. She'd known this man for 6 hours. Pot roast, she said, grasping at the most American thing she could think of. With carrots and potatoes? Thomas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Wrong answer. Interesting, Morrison said slowly, because Tom here hasn't eaten red meat since he came back from the Pacific. Something about what he saw there. He leaned closer. You want to try again? Or should we discuss how you're committing immigration fraud? Greta felt the walls closing in. Beside her, Thomas's jaw clenched. She's nervous, Thomas said. You're interrogating her in her own home? This isn't her home. Not yet. Morrison smiled without warmth. Not until I'm convinced this marriage is real. Thomas stepped between Greta and the sheriff, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You calling me a liar, Morrison? I'm calling this whole situation suspicious. Morrison gestured to his deputies. Search the house. I want to see where they sleep. You have no right. I have every right. Immigration Act of 1924, amended 1945. Fraudulent marriages are grounds for immediate deportation. Morrison's eyes glinted. Unless you've got proof this is real. Greta watched the deputies head toward the bedrooms. In minutes, they'd find her suitcase in the guest room, still packed. Separate beds, separate lives. The truth written in furniture and empty drawers. Wait. The word escaped before she could stop it. Everyone turned. Greta's heart hammered, but she forced herself to meet Thomas's eyes. She saw confusion there, and something else. A question. She answered it by stepping forward and taking his hand. You want proof? She said to Morrison, her accent thickening with emotion. My husband doesn't eat pot roast because he saw terrible things in the war. Things that changed him. I know this because he told me last night when he couldn't sleep. When he woke up shaking and I held him until dawn. Thomas's hand tightened around hers. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't contradict her. He told me about the island where his unit landed, Greta continued, the lies flowing easier now, about the heat and the fear and the friend who died in his arms. He told me things he's never told anyone because that's what married people do. They share their darkness. Morrison's expression shifted, uncertain now. You think I don't know my husband? Greta's voice rose. I know he takes his coffee black. I know he reads before bed. I know he's kind to a fault, which is why he married a German girl when half this country wants us dead. She stepped closer to Morrison. And I know that you lost someone in the war too. I can see it in your eyes. So maybe instead of looking for fraud, you should ask yourself why you're really here. The silence stretched. One of the deputies cleared his throat. Sheriff, he said quietly, maybe we should. I'll decide what we should do. But Morrison's voice had lost its edge. He studied Greta and Thomas, their joined hands, the way Thomas had moved protectively in front of her. Where'd you serve, Tom? Morrison asked suddenly. Okinawa, 96th Infantry Division. Morrison's face changed. I had a nephew there. Didn't make it home. I'm sorry. Yeah. Morrison looked at Greta again. Something softer in his expression now. You know what you're getting into, Fräulein? Marrying a man with ghosts? I have my own ghosts, Sheriff. Perhaps that's why we understand each other. Morrison studied them for a long moment, then nodded to his deputies. Let's go. Sir? One of them protested. We didn't finish. I said, let's go. Morrison moved toward the door, then paused. Tom, you need anything, you let me know. And Mrs. Brennan? He tipped his hat. Welcome to Pennsylvania. The door closed behind them. Truck engines started, then faded into the distance. Greta released Thomas's hand like it burned. They stood in the sudden silence, not looking at each other. Thank you, Thomas said finally. You saved us both. I saved myself. Greta's voice shook. Don't mistake survival for heroism. Still, what you said about Okinawa, was it true? Thomas's silence was answer enough. Greta moved to the window, watching the taillights disappear. So now what? We pretend to be married, live this lie. For 6 months, Thomas said. That's how long until your citizenship is secure. After that, you can leave. Divorce me. Whatever you want. 6 months of pretending. Yes. Greta turned to face him. And what do you get out of this arrangement, Thomas Brennan? Why help a stranger? Thomas looked away, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because 3 years ago my sister Anna married a man from town, good family respected. 6 months later she was dead, fell down the stairs, they said. He met Greta's eyes. But I saw the bruises. I saw what he did to her, and I did nothing. The confession hung between them. So this is penance, Greta said softly. This is me trying to be better than I was. Thomas moved toward the hallway. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Give you space. Thomas, he stopped. The sheriff might come back. Check on us. Greta's voice was steady despite her racing heart. If he finds you sleeping in the barn, you're right. Thomas rubbed his face. I'll take the couch. No, Greta surprised herself. We're supposed to be married. Married people share a room. She saw his expression and added quickly, there's a chair in the bedroom. You can sleep there, but we need to make this look real. Thomas nodded slowly. Okay, but Greta, the door still locks from the inside, and you keep the key. That night, Greta lay in the narrow bed, listening to Thomas's breathing from the chair across the room. The darkness felt heavy, filled with unspoken truths and the weight of their shared deception. Are you awake? Thomas's voice cut through the silence. Yes. I need to tell you something about tomorrow. He shifted in the chair. The town has a welcome committee for war brides. They'll come here, bring food, ask questions, lots of questions. Greta's stomach tightened. More tests? Worse, neighbors who think they're being kind. Thomas paused. There's a woman, Margaret Chen. Her husband brought her from China in 1943. She helps new brides adjust, but she's also perceptive. If anyone will see through us, it's her. Then we prepare. Greta sat up, her silhouette visible in the moonlight. Tell me everything. Your birthday, your parents' names, how we supposedly met. Every detail. Greta, it's late. Do you want this to work or not? Thomas was quiet for a moment. March 15th, 1918. My parents were John and Elizabeth Brennan, both dead now. My brother Robert was 2 years older. He started writing to you in early 1945 through a pen pal program for soldiers. What did he write about? The farm. His dreams of coming home, starting a family. He made it sound like paradise. Thomas's voice turned bitter. He always was a better liar than me. And when did you take over the letters? After the telegram came, November 1944. You'd already written back 3 times. You talked about Berlin, the bombings, your parents dying in the rubble. You sounded so... He trailed off. Desperate? Hopeful? Despite everything, you still had hope. Thomas stood, moving to the window. I couldn't let that die, so I kept writing. Pretended to be Robert. Made promises I had no right to make. Greta absorbed this. So you lied to me for 2 years. Yes. And now you're asking me to lie for you. I'm asking you to lie for yourself, for your freedom. Thomas turned to face her. But if you want to leave, I'll drive you to New York tomorrow. Give you money for a fresh start, no questions asked. Greta considered this. Freedom. The word felt foreign, dangerous. In Germany, freedom had meant chaos, violence, starvation. Here it meant uncertainty, but also possibility. "I'll stay," she said finally. "But not because I'm grateful, because I'm practical. 6 months of pretending is better than a lifetime of running." Fair enough. "And Thomas, no more lies between us. If we're going to survive this, I need to know who you really are." Thomas returned to the chair, his face half shadowed. "What do you want to know? Why did you really bring me here?" The truth this time. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because when I read your letters, I saw someone fighting to stay alive, and when I came back from Okinawa, all I wanted to do was die." His voice cracked. "I thought maybe if I could save you, it would mean something, that all the death would mean something." Greta felt something shift in her chest. Not pity. She had no room for that. But recognition. They were both survivors, both haunted, both pretending to be whole. "We're quite a pair," she said softly. "Yeah." Thomas almost smiled. "We are." A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate. Thomas moved silently to the dresser, pulling out something that glinted in the moonlight. A gun. "Stay here," he whispered. "No." Greta grabbed his arm. "If someone's watching, married couples face things together." The footsteps stopped at the door. Then a knock. Soft, almost apologetic. Thomas and Greta exchanged glances. He tucked the gun into his waistband and moved to the door, Greta close behind. When he opened it, a small Asian woman stood there, holding a covered dish. Her dark eyes took in everything. Thomas's protective stance, Greta's hand on his shoulder, their shared wariness. "I'm Margaret Chen," she said in perfect English, "and we need to talk about what you're really doing here." Thomas didn't move from the doorway. "It's 2 a.m, Mrs. Chen." "I know what time it is." Margaret's gaze shifted to Greta. "I also know what a frightened woman looks like, and what a guilty man looks like. So either let me in, or I go straight to Morrison with my suspicions." Greta felt Thomas tense beside her. She squeezed his shoulder, a warning, a plea, then stepped forward. "Come in," she said. Thomas shot her a look but moved aside. Margaret entered, setting her dish on the kitchen table with practiced ease. She studied the house, noting the single suitcase still visible in the hallway, the untouched kitchen, the careful distance between Thomas and Greta. "Sit," Margaret commanded, and somehow they both obeyed. She uncovered the dish, dumplings still warm, and pushed it toward Greta. "Eat, you look half-starved." Greta's stomach betrayed her with a growl. She hadn't eaten since the ship. Pride warred with hunger, and hunger won. She took a dumpling, bit into it, and nearly wept at the taste. "When did you last have a real meal?" "And," Margaret asked. "The camp, 3 weeks ago." The truth slipped out before Greta could stop it. Margaret nodded as if this confirmed something. She turned to Thomas. "And you? When did you last sleep through the night?" Thomas's jaw clenched. "That's none of your business. Everything in this town is my business. That's how I've survived for 12 years. Margaret poured tea from a thermos she'd brought. "You think you're the first desperate people I've seen? The first fake marriage?" The words hung in the air like an accusation. Greta set down the dumpling, her appetite vanishing. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said carefully. "Don't insult me." Margaret's voice was sharp. "I watched you at the market last week, asking about the ship schedules. I saw you file that proxy marriage certificate 3 days before she arrived. And I heard Morrison bragging about how he was going to catch himself a fraud." Greta's blood ran cold. "You told him?" "I told him nothing. Yet." Margaret sipped her tea. "But I could. 1 word from me, and Morrison would have all the evidence he needs." "What do you want?" Thomas asked, his hand moving subtly toward where he'd hidden the gun. Margaret caught the movement and smiled without humor. "I want the truth. Why are you doing this?" Greta and Thomas exchanged glances. The silence stretched, heavy with calculation. Finally Greta spoke. "Because I had nowhere else to go." "And you?" Margaret looked at Thomas. "Because I owed someone a debt." "Your sister." It wasn't a question. Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I knew Anna. She used to buy vegetables from my garden, always wore long sleeves even in summer." She paused. "I knew what was happening, and like everyone else, I did nothing." Thomas's face went pale. "Then you understand?" "I understand guilt. I understand trying to fix the past by saving someone in the present." Margaret leaned forward. "But I also understand that good intentions don't make fraud legal. If Morrison proves this marriage is fake, Greta goes back to Germany, and you, Thomas, could face prison. So what do you suggest?" Greta asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Margaret studied them both, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, gathering her thermos. "I suggest you learn to be better liars." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Tomorrow, the welcome committee arrives at noon. They'll ask about your courtship, your wedding night, your plans for children. They'll watch how you touch each other, how you speak, how you breathe in the same room." "We can handle it," Thomas said. "Can you?" Margaret turned back. "Because right now, you stand like strangers. You flinch when you touch. You don't even know each other's tells." She looked at Greta. "Does he take sugar in his coffee?" Greta hesitated. "No. 2 spoons, always." Margaret looked at Thomas. "Does she sleep on her left side or right?" Thomas's silence was answer enough. "You have 12 hours, Margaret said. 12 hours to become people who've shared a bed, shared secrets, shared a life. Because if you can't convince me tomorrow, you won't convince anyone." She opened the door, then added, "And for what it's worth, I hope you make it. This town could use more people willing to choose kindness over cruelty." The door closed behind her, leaving Greta and Thomas alone with the weight of her challenge. 12 hours, Greta whispered. Thomas met her eyes. "Then we'd better get started." Metatatas, they sat at the kitchen table, the dumplings growing cold between them, and began the strange work of building a false history. "Coffee, 2 sugars, Thomas said. "What else?" Greta thought. "I sleep on my right side. I wake early. I hate the sound of dogs barking. It reminds me of the camps." She paused. "Your turn." "I read before bed. Always the same book, Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. I've read it 17 times. Thomas rubbed his jaw. "I can't stand the smell of diesel fuel. It reminds me of the landing crafts. The nightmares. How often?" 3-4 times a week. His voice was quiet. "I dream I'm back on the island, that I can't save them." Greta reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. Not touching, but close. "I dream about the bombings, the sound of the sirens, my mother's hand going limp in mine." Their eyes met, and something shifted. This wasn't pretend anymore. "We should practice," Thomas said. "Touching. If we flinch tomorrow, they'll know." Greta nodded. She stood, moved around the table, and held out her hand. Thomas took it, his palm rough and warm. They stood like that, awkward, uncertain. "This isn't working," Greta said. "We look like we're shaking hands at a business meeting. What do you suggest?" Greta took a breath, then stepped closer. She placed his hand on her waist, her own hand on his shoulder. "Like this, like we're dancing." Thomas's breath caught. "I'm not a good dancer." "Neither am I. But married people don't have to be good. They just have to be comfortable." She began to sway slightly. No music, just the creak of floorboards and the tick of the kitchen clock. Thomas followed her lead, stiff at first, then gradually relaxing. They moved in the dim kitchen, 2 strangers learning the geography of each other's bodies, where to place a hand, how close to stand. The rhythm of shared breath. "Tell me something true," Greta said softly. "Something you've never told anyone." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I was supposed to die on Okinawa. My unit was pinned down, and I volunteered for a suicide run to draw fire. But the Japanese soldier who had me in his sights, he hesitated, just for a second. And in that second, our artillery hit. He died. I didn't," his voice cracked. I see his face every night, wonder why he hesitated, wonder if he had someone waiting for him too. Greta's hand tightened on his shoulder. I stole bread from a dying woman in the camp. She was too weak to stop me, and I was too hungry to care. She died that night. I ate the bread and survived. She met his eyes. We're both haunted by the people we couldn't save, and the ones we did. They stopped moving, standing close in the darkness. Thomas raised his hand, hesitated, then gently touched Greta's cheek. She didn't flinch. "Is this okay?" he asked. "Yes. If I ever make you uncomfortable, I'll tell you. I promise." Greta covered his hand with hers. "And you'll stop. Because that's who you are." A sound outside made them both turn. Headlights swept across the window, a car slowing, then passing. Just a neighbor, probably, but it reminded them both of the danger they were in. "We should sleep," Thomas said, not moving. "Big day tomorrow." "Yes." Greta stepped back, the space between them suddenly cold. "Thomas, thank you for this. For giving me a choice. Thank you for staying." They returned to the bedroom, the chair, the careful distance. But something had changed. When Greta closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of his hand on her waist. And when Thomas finally drifted off, his nightmares were quieter than usual. At dawn, Greta woke to find Thomas already up, making coffee. 2 cups. One black, one with 2 sugars. He handed her the sweet one without asking. "How did you know?" she asked. Thomas smiled slightly. "You're not the only one who pays attention." The welcome committee arrived at noon sharp, led by a formidable woman named Dorothy Walsh, who carried a casserole and an interrogation's worth of questions. Margaret Chen came too, her expression neutral, watching everything. "So tell us, dear," Dorothy said, settling into the living room like she owned it. "How did you and Thomas fall in love?" Greta felt Thomas's hand find hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles, a gesture they'd practiced at dawn. She looked at him, and the lie came easier than expected. "Through words first," she said, "then through truth." Dorothy Walsh leaned forward, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Words and truth. How poetic. But I want details, dear. When did you know he was the one?" Greta felt the weight of 6 pairs of eyes, Dorothy, Margaret, and 4 other women from town, all watching for cracks in the facade. Thomas's hand tightened around hers, a silent message. "We can do this." "It was a letter he sent in March," Greta said, the lie forming as she spoke. "He told me about a morning on the farm when he saw a fox with her kits. He wrote that even in war, life finds a way to continue, that hope isn't foolish, it's necessary." She looked at Thomas, and something true entered her voice. "I'd forgotten what hope felt like. He reminded me." Thomas's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded crossing his face. She wrote back about a flower growing through rubble in Berlin. "A yellow wildflower," she said, "proof that beauty survives." The women made approving sounds, but Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew they were performing, but she was also seeing something else, the way they'd learned to lean into each other, the practiced intimacy that was starting to feel less practiced. "And the wedding night?" Dorothy asked with a coy smile. "Was it everything you hoped?" Greta felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the audacity of the question. Beside her, Thomas stiffened. "That's private," he said, his voice carrying an edge. "Oh, don't be modest," Dorothy laughed. "We're all married women here, well, except for young Susan." She gestured to a girl barely 20, "But she'll learn soon enough." Margaret intervened smoothly. "Dorothy, remember how you felt when people asked you invasive questions after you married Frank? Some things are sacred." Dorothy huffed but backed down. Fine, but you can't blame us for being curious. It's not every day a German girl comes to our little town." The emphasis on German wasn't lost on anyone. The room's temperature dropped several degrees. "Is that a problem?" Greta asked, her accent suddenly more pronounced. "That I'm German? Of course not," Dorothy said too quickly. "We're all Christian women here. We forgive." "Forgive?" Greta repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Forgive me for what? For being born in the wrong country? For surviving when others didn't? Greta, Thomas started, but she stood, pulling her hand from his. No, I want to understand. She faced Dorothy directly. My crime is being German. Your son's crime was being American. Both of us were just born into a war we didn't start. So tell me, Mrs. Walsh, what exactly are you forgiving me for? The silence was deafening. Dorothy's face flushed red. Margaret watched with something like approval. Thomas stood, moving beside Greta, not in front of her, but beside her, united. My wife, Thomas said quietly, lost everything. Her home, her family, her country. She came here with nothing but hope and courage. If that's not American, I don't know what is. Dorothy gathered her purse, her casserole forgotten. Well, I can see you two are very passionate. We'll leave you to it. She stood, the other women following like ducklings. Welcome to the neighborhood, Mrs. Brennan. I hope you'll be very happy here. The words were polite, but the tone was ice. When the door closed behind them, Greta sagged against the wall. I ruined it. I couldn't keep quiet. You were perfect, Thomas said. Perfect? I just made an enemy of the most influential woman in town. No, you showed them you're not a victim, that you're strong. Thomas smiled, genuine this time. And honestly, Dorothy Walsh needed someone to stand up to her years ago. Margaret, who'd stayed behind, cleared her throat. He's right. Dorothy respects strength even if she doesn't like it. She moved toward the door, then paused. You two are getting better at this. The hand-holding, the unified front, but there's still something missing. What? Greta asked. Margaret studied them both. You defend each other, you support each other, but you don't look at each other like you're in love. You look at each other like you're allies in a war. She opened the door. Figure out the difference before Sunday. Why Sunday? Thomas asked. Church. The whole town will be watching. Margaret smiled slightly. And Dorothy Walsh sits in the front pew. When she left, Greta and Thomas stood in the sudden quiet, the weight of her words settling over them. How do people in love look at each other? Greta asked. Thomas shook his head. I don't know. I've never what? Been in love. He said it simply, like admitting to never having tasted chocolate. Have you? Greta thought of a boy in Berlin before the war. Stolen kisses and promises that evaporated like morning fog. I thought I was. But it was just youth and fear of being alone. They looked at each other then, really looked. Two people who'd agreed to fake a marriage, who were learning each other's coffee preferences and sleeping habits, who were building something that looked like intimacy, but was really just survival. We have 4 days, Thomas said, to figure out how to fake love. But as Greta met his eyes, she wondered if they were faking it at all, or if something real was growing in the spaces between their lies. Then we'd better practice, she said softly. And this time, when Thomas took her hand, neither of them flinched.